My name is Alara Vance, and the night my world shattered began with the sound of rain hammering against the car roof. The person responsible for the breaking was Kalin Thorne, the boy I had loved for as long as I could remember. He was making me get out in the middle of a torrential downpour, on a deserted road, all to defend my father's illegitimate daughter, Sarah Moss. Apologize to Sarah or get out of the car, Alara. Kalin's voice was ice, his expression one of cold contempt as he looked at me, as if I were something filthy he'd scraped off his shoe. In the seat beside him, Sarah dabbed at her eyes, but I didn't miss the glint of triumph she shot me when Kalin wasn't looking. My own eyes stung with furious, humiliated tears. I didn't ruin her dress. I swear, Kalin. It wasn't me. Sarah's voice was a delicate, trembling whisper. Alara, I know you're angry about my mother and your father. I understand. If tearing my gown makes you feel better, then it's okay. I don't mind. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Don't call me that. You're not my sister. The daughter of a mistress has no right to claim any relation to me. Kalin flinched as if I'd struck Sarah myself. His hand, which had been resting on the seat between them, moved to cover hers protectively. The sight of it sent a physical pain through my chest. That's enough, Alara, he bit out, his voice low and dangerous. This is your final warning. Apologize to Sarah. No. For the dress, for the humiliation. Do it and we can forget this ever happened. My pride, the last shred of dignity I had left, refused to bend. I will not apologize for something I didn't do. His patience, worn thin by weeks of Sarah's whispered accusations and my own stubborn denials, snapped. Stop the car, he commanded his driver. The luxury sedan glided to a halt on the gravel shoulder. The only sounds were the relentless drumming of the rain and my own frantic heartbeat. Get out, Kalin said, not looking at me. What? Kalin, you can't be serious. It's pouring. This place is remote, there are no taxis. Get out. He finally turned his head, and the utter indifference in his eyes froze the plea in my throat. You need to reflect on your actions. When you've figured out how to behave, when you're ready to apologize to Sarah properly, then you can come find us. Not a moment before. The door swung open and a gust of wind-driven rain soaked my lap. He wasn't joking. Humiliation burned hotter than any anger. I stumbled out, my shoes sinking into the muddy gravel. Before I could even turn around, the door slammed shut with a final, deafening thud. I scrambled forward, pounding on the tinted window. Kalin, please, don't leave me here. The window remained opaque. The engine purred. As the car began to pull away, my hand caught on the door handle for a split second before I was wrenched off balance, falling hard onto the wet, unforgiving ground. I lay there, stunned, as the taillights of Kalin's car blurred into two red pinpricks in the distance and then vanished entirely. The rapid streams rolling down my face could no longer be distinguished as raindrops or tears. I had never imagined that the boy who once shielded me from playground bullies, who vowed to protect me forever, would abandon me in a storm to seek justice for the daughter of my father's mistress. Kalin Thorne and I were neighbors, childhood sweethearts. Our mothers were best friends. They made a promise when they were both pregnant. If they had daughters, they'd be sisters. If sons, brothers. And if one was a boy and the other a girl, they'd arrange a childhood betrothal. So Kalin and I were promised to each other from birth. His mother, Eleanor Thorne, gave my mother a priceless heirloom bracelet as a token. My mother gave her an expensive jade pendant in return. Kalin and I were playmates since infancy, brought together by our mothers. From kindergarten through elementary, middle, and high school, we were always in the same class, inseparable. Our mothers agreed we would get engaged after graduating high school and getting into college. But everything changed during my sophomore year. My mom passed away unexpectedly in a car accident. I was utterly devastated, lost in a fog of grief for a long time. Just as I was beginning to surface from that bottomless sorrow, my father brought home a strange woman and a girl about my age. He told me to call the woman Aunt Daphne, and the girl Sarah Moss my sister. I couldn't accept that my father had moved on so quickly after my mother's death. Not to mention that his new lover's daughter looked so much like him. Given that Sarah was almost the same age as me, it was clear my dad had been cheating while my mom was still alive. I hated him for it. And I despised that mistress and her daughter. Kalin initially stood with me, sharing my resentment. But at some point I noticed he'd started to feel sorry for Sarah. Life hadn't been easy for Sarah, her mother, and my father since my mom passed away. To be honest, all of it was because of my mother's foresight. My mother was the epitome of a beautiful, wealthy, and virtuous woman. My father was a phoenix man, someone from a humble background who marries into wealth. Perhaps she knew about the inherent flaws such men can have. Although she married my father, she kept a guard up against him. He thought that after her death he could rightfully inherit her property and live a good life with his mistress and her daughter. He was wrong. My mother had notarized all her assets to be left to me, her only daughter. He couldn't touch a single penny. So, on the third day after my dad moved his new family into our home, my mom's lawyer friend showed up with the paperwork. I still vividly remember the shock on my dad's face, on Daphne's, on Sarah's. The lawyer gave my dad one option. Since he was already remarried with a wife and daughter, he had to move out of my mother's property. Just like that, my dad and his new family were kicked out. The matter should have ended there. But my father brought Sarah to our elite school. I had always ignored her. I knew the fault wasn't hers. The blame lay with my shameless father and her shameless mother. I never expected Sarah would take the initiative to frame me. Her first attempt was deliberately leaking our relationship, making everyone aware of her status as the illegitimate daughter of a mistress. At our age, classmates have a strong sense of justice. After learning Sarah was the mistress's child, they were all disgusted by her. She was isolated, with no one in class willing to befriend her. Every day, Sarah came to school wearing faded, washed-out clothes. She ate the cheapest meals in the cafeteria. I didn't know why she did this. As far as I knew, my dad had secretly saved quite a bit of money. Just getting Sarah into our elite school would have cost a fortune in admission fees alone. Not to mention, even though he was kicked out of the villa, he was still a company executive with a substantial salary. Sarah's self-exposure while pretending to be poor was baffling, but I didn't pay it much attention. Later, Sarah was locked in a restroom and bullied. The perpetrators were a few spoiled rich girls who had no interest in studying. They bullied Sarah not because she was a mistress's daughter, but because she had somehow provoked them. To be fair, Sarah does have a certain charm. She appears fragile and helpless, skilled at putting on a facade. One day, she fainted right into the arms of a boy one of the young ladies fancied. Upon learning the boy she liked had helped Sarah, the young lady couldn't swallow her pride and cornered Sarah in the restroom with her gang. They slapped her, forced her to kneel, and were about to make her strip. As fate would have it, Kalin and his close friend witnessed it. They heard Sarah's desperate cries and came to her rescue. Seeing her tragic state, they wanted to call the police. But Sarah refused, shaking her head in tears. "Don't call the police. Don't. And don't tell the teachers. Don't tell anyone." "Why?" Kalin was puzzled. Sarah only cried harder, a picture of rain beaten, a Chinese idiom for a beautiful woman crying. Finally, under Kalin's persistent questioning, she uttered a seemingly ambiguous statement. "As long as it makes my sister feel better, she can treat me however she wants. After all, this is what my mother and I owe her." Just like that, Sarah pinned the blame for the bullying on me. And Kalin believed her. I had no idea I was being framed until rumors started spreading at school that I was bullying Sarah. The situation escalated. My close friend Chloe heard about it and told me. Kalin also warned me, "Alara, that's enough. Sarah's innocent. You should direct your anger at your dad and her mother, not take it out on someone unrelated." This baseless accusation made me laugh in frustration. I denied it to Kalin, but he didn't believe me. Furious, I went to find Sarah and demanded she clarify the matter. To my shock, while I was questioning her, she started slapping herself violently, then suddenly knelt before me, kowtowing like she was pounding garlic. Having never witnessed such a scene, I was so terrified I couldn't speak. Then a video of Sarah violently slapping herself and kneeling before me went viral. The video had no sound, so our conversation couldn't be heard. Only her terrified face, her hard slaps, and her desperate begging for mercy were visible. She was ruthless to herself, slapping until her face swelled and her mouth bled. After that video spread, my bullying of Sarah was confirmed. The court of public opinion had convicted me. I was innocent, yet suddenly thrust into the eye of the storm. And now, because of another one of her schemes, a broken dress strap during a school performance, I was standing alone on a dark, stormy road, abandoned by the person I thought would always be there for me. The rain soaked me to the bone, and a cold deeper than the chill in the air settled into my heart. Kalin had chosen his side. And it wasn't mine. I stood there for a long time, shivering on the side of that desolate road, the reality of Kalin's abandonment washing over me in waves as cold and relentless as the rain. The initial shock gave way to a raw primal fear. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the occasional terrifying flash of distant lightning that illuminated the skeletal trees lining the road. The wind howled, whipping the rain into a stinging frenzy. I had to move. I had to find help. My phone was in Kalin's car, left behind in my panic. I had no money, no way to call for a taxi. My only option was to walk. So I started walking. One foot in front of the other, my soaked clothes clinging to me like a lead weight. The gravel bit into my thin-soled shoes. I cried as I walked, the sobs ripped from my chest by the wind, my tears indistinguishable from the rain. I hoped against hope to see headlights, to meet someone, anyone who could help me. I had no idea how far I'd gone or how much time had passed when I heard a sound behind me. A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. I turned, squinting through the downpour, and saw a man in a raincoat riding a bicycle, his headlamp cutting a weak beam through the gloom. "Help!" I cried out, my voice hoarse and swallowed by the storm. "Please help me." He slowed his bike and stopped a few feet from me. I thought I'd met a savior. But as he got closer, the feeling curdled into dread. He didn't say a word. His eyes, shadowed by his hood, scanned the empty road, then settled on me. Before I could react, his hand shot out and clamped around my arm. His grip was like iron. "Let go of me!" I screamed, struggling desperately. "Help! Somebody please!" But there was nothing around us but the sound of rain and wind. My screams were useless. He dragged me, kicking and scratching, toward the thick green belt of trees beside the road. I fought with every ounce of strength I had, my nails raking across his face, drawing blood. He grunted in annoyance, and then, with a snarl of fury, he punched me viciously on the side of my head. A white-hot pain exploded in my skull. The world tilted, spun, and then went black. When I drifted back to consciousness, the first thing I heard was a voice I knew and loved, thick with emotion. "It's all Kalin's fault, that damned bastard. How could he abandon Alara for that woman's daughter?" It was Eleanor Thorne, Kalin's mother. Her voice was choked with tears and self-recrimination. Thankfully, Alara was lucky. If anything had happened to her, how could I ever face her mother? "Myra, good people have heaven's protection and can turn calamities into blessings," a deeper voice replied. It was Mr. Thorne, Kalin's father. As for Kalin, he probably never expected something like this to happen. We can't entirely blame him. How can we not blame him? Eleanor's voice rose in anguish. It was so dark and raining. How could he bear to leave her alone on that remote roadside? That wretched boy. I'll definitely give him a beating when I get back. I'll drag him here to kneel and apologize to Alara. "We can't let this escalate right now," Mr. Thorne reasoned, his tone grim. "Only the police and that fleeing man know what happened to Alara. If we tell Kalin, it might traumatize him, and it wouldn't be good for Alara's reputation either. My suggestion is to keep this hidden until after his college entrance exams, then tell him. So Alara is just supposed to suffer this injustice in silence? For now. It's the best solution." I slowly opened my eyes. I was in a sterile white hospital room. Mrs. Thorne was holding my hand, her tears falling onto my wrist. The cold, wet sensation was what had pulled me fully awake. "Auntie." My voice was a cracked whisper. "Alara. Good child, you're awake." Eleanor Thorne gasped and immediately gathered me into a tight, desperate hug. "Don't be afraid, sweetheart. Auntie is here. You're safe." I clung to her, the dam breaking as silent tears streamed down my face. She held me, rocking gently until my sobs subsided. He told me what had happened. The bastard hadn't succeeded. Just as he was about to assault me, a patrolling neighborhood watch team had driven by. They'd spotted the electric bike abandoned on the roadside and noticed the disturbed undergrowth. When they got out to investigate, the man had panicked, jumped into the nearby river and fled. I felt a wave of nauseating relief. I had escaped by a thread. Clutching Mrs. Thorne's hand, I made her promise. "Auntie, I don't want anyone to know about this. Not even Kalin. Please." She agreed, her eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. I stayed in the hospital for half a month. I had multiple soft tissue injuries and a minor concussion from the punch. During those 2 weeks I didn't contact Kalin once. And he never came to see me. Mrs. Thorne retrieved my phone from Kalin's car and gave it to me. I scrolled through the chat history. There was only one message from him, sent on the night of the incident. Kalin, have you made up your mind? Let me know when you're ready and I'll come pick you up right away. I checked the timestamp. My blood ran cold. It was sent exactly when that stranger was on top of me, when his fist was connecting with my skull. While I was being assaulted, all Kalin could think about was making me apologize to Sarah. A strange, hollow sound escaped my lips. It took me a moment to realize it was laughter. I laughed until my sides ached, laughed until the sound twisted into broken sobs, laughed until my throat was raw and my vision blurred. Kalin, I thought, the laughter dying in my chest, leaving behind an icy void. I won't like you anymore. Never again. On the day I finally returned to school, I ran into Kalin and Sarah outside the classroom. They walked side by side, chatting and laughing easily. Sarah was no longer wearing those cheap faded clothes. Instead, she was dressed in expensive brand-name attire. She and Kalin were even wearing matching sneakers. Needless to say, they were a gift from him. When they saw me, the smiles faded from their faces. Kalin distanced himself from Sarah slightly and quickly approached me. He looked me up and down, his expression a mix of annoyance and something else I couldn't place. Finally decided to come back? He snorted coldly. Did you think hiding for half a month would let you off the hook for apologizing? Let me tell you, the matter from last time isn't over. If you don't apologize to Sarah, I won't forgive you. Did he really think I still cared about his forgiveness? Sarah trotted over, playing the peacemaker. Kalin, forget it. I won't dwell on what happened last time. You don't have to force her to apologize. This is the attitude one should have when they've done something wrong, Kalin said, his eyes still locked on me, as if Sarah were a shining example I should follow. Let me tell you, Alara, just because I dote on you doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. People must pay the price for their mistakes. Ignoring him completely, I turned and walked into the classroom. He was right. People must always pay the price for their mistakes. I had already paid a heavy price for liking Kalin Thorne. And I would never make that payment again. Seeing me ignore him, Kalin followed me in, his anger palpable. Are you still being stubborn, Alara? This is your last chance. Apologize now and we can still sit together. Otherwise, you'll have to move to the back and sit alone. Sarah quickly added, I'll move away. After all, the spot next to you has always been my sister's. I stared at the desk that had been mine since freshman year. It was covered in Sarah's things. Her pastel-colored notebooks, her collection of cute pens. My things were gone. My eyes scanned the room and finally found my books, haphazardly piled on a desk in the very last row. Without a word, without a single glance back at them, I walked to the back of the room and sat down. I opened my textbook, my movements mechanical. Whatever Kalin and Sarah were saying to each other, I didn't hear it. I didn't want to spare them a single moment of my attention. From now on, I would focus only on studying. My mind was set only on the words in front of me, on the equations, on the future that lay beyond this toxic place. Kalin Thorne and Sarah Moss were now part of a past I was determined to leave behind. At lunchtime they left together. I waited until they were gone before I stood up. I could feel Kalin's eyes on me from the doorway. He was waiting for me to break, to make the first move, to run after him. I didn't. I kept my head down and walked to the cafeteria alone, my resolve hardening with every step I took away from him. The silence I cultivated became my armor. In the classroom I was an island, my desk in the last row, a fortress walled with textbooks and practice exams. The sounds of the school, the chatter, the gossip, the whispered speculations about my sudden demotion to the back of the class, faded into a distant hum. I'd started wearing earbuds, not always playing music, but simply to create a barrier, a visible sign that I was unavailable. Kalin didn't know what to do with my indifference. His attempts to provoke a reaction became increasingly desperate. He and Sarah were a constant performative duo. He bought her lunches, carried her books, and laughed a little too loudly at her jokes, all within my line of sight. I offered no reaction. I simply chewed my food, turned the pages of my book, and calculated my escape vector. My closest friend, Chloe, was the only one who dared breach the perimeter. Alara, she whispered one day during a free period, sliding into the seat next to me. Do you know what's going on with Kalin and Sarah? Everyone's saying they're together. I didn't look up from my calculus problem. No idea. You really don't know? She pressed, her voice cautious. Did you have a fight with him? What happened that kept you out of school for half a month? Her questions were a needle, pricking at the carefully sealed box where I kept the memories of that night. My hands holding my pen trembled slightly. I could almost smell the wet asphalt, feel the crushing weight of that man, hear the ragged panting. I forced my breathing to stay even, my nails digging into my palms. Don't scream. Don't lose composure. Chloe was still talking. They say you broke up with Kalin because of Sarah. Is that true? It's true, I said, my voice flat. I finally met her eyes. We're done. How can you just accept it? She hissed, her loyalty a fierce, warm thing. If it were me, I'd tear that homewrecker apart. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, cutting her off. Kalin appeared in the doorway, Sarah trailing behind him like a shadow, her eyes already shimmering with unshed tears. She'd heard. I'm not the other woman, she wailed, her voice a practiced tremor. I didn't do anything. Kalin's gaze zeroed in on me, fury darkening his features. He'd found his reason to engage. I thought you had repented, he said, his voice low and scathing. But I never expected you to be so despicable behind my back. What good does it do you to ruin Sarah's reputation like this? His furious questioning made Chloe shrink back and flee. I simply lowered my head, took out a fresh roll of paper and began writing out chemical formulas. I didn't hear his accusations. I just found the noise irritating. How strange, I thought. What does his business with Sarah have to do with me? I clearly hadn't said or done anything. Yet here he was, confronting me, his anger a shield for her. It was then I understood the terrifying simplicity of it all. Protecting someone didn't require a reason. Kalin was now wholeheartedly defending Sarah, and targeting me required no justification in his mind. After school, I saw him holding the car door open for her, helping her into the Thorne family sedan. He glanced back at me expectant. A lifetime of habit hung in the air between us. Me running to that car, sliding into my accustomed seat beside him. But a lifetime of habit had been burned away on that rainy road. I turned and walked in the opposite direction. The first thing I'd done after being discharged from the hospital was use a fraction of my inheritance to hire a private driver. I would never again put myself in a position where I could be abandoned. The next day, Kalin and Sarah were absent. The class monitor, a well-meaning boy named Ben, sought me out during break. Elara, could you give Kalin a call? He asked, his brow furrowed with concern. He didn't come to school, didn't ask for leave, and didn't hand in his homework. I called him, but he didn't answer. You're closest to him. Could you ask him for me? I looked at him, my expression distant. Sorry, Ben. I don't have that obligation. The shock on his face was almost comical. He, like everyone else, was used to me being Kalin's keeper, the one who tracked his assignments and nagged him about his grades. Our shared goal of attending the best university together had been a given. He scratched his head. Aren't you worried his grades might drop? I didn't respond, just returned to my test paper. The answer was no. I wasn't worried. His future was no longer intertwined with mine. The mystery of their absence was soon solved by a chatterbox in the front row. They went to the countryside. Sarah's grandmother is sick. She was too worried not to visit, so Kalin accompanied her. Sarah's social media told the rest of the story in a gushing torrent of posts. Pictures of a dilapidated rural clinic. Kalin, looking solemn and important, talking to doctors. A photo of their hands intertwined outside an operating room, Sarah's face tear-streaked. Captions gushed about how Kalin had used his money and influence to secure the best care, how he'd covered all the medical expenses. I heard the stories so many times my ears grew calloused. To preserve my sanity, the earbuds became a permanent fixture. They returned 5 days later. Sarah, playing the humble heroine, brought back local specialties for everyone, including me. She placed a small bag of dried fruit on my desk with a pitying look. I kept my head down, working on a practice essay, showing no reaction to the gift or her performative kindness. Kalin stormed over, his patience evidently exhausted by my continued disregard. He shouted my name, shaking my desk to get my attention. When I finally looked up, my gaze blank, he noticed the earbuds. His face paled, a flicker of something like panic in his eyes before it was swallowed by anger. He'd been yelling and I hadn't heard a word. I just glanced at him and lowered my head again, the dismissal absolute. The monthly exam results were a seismic event in our competitive school. Kalin Thorne, who had always vied with me for first or second place, had plummeted beyond the top 50. Unsurprisingly, Sarah was at the very bottom of the rankings. The teacher called him in for a talk. I don't know what he said, but soon after I was summoned to the faculty office. "Elara," the teacher began, steepling his fingers. "You and Kalin are the most promising students in our class. Now that his grades have dropped so much, I think it's your duty to help him. Move back and sit with him." I looked my teacher squarely in the eye. "I refuse." The words were calm, clear, and final. "Everyone is responsible for their own life. Kalin and I aren't that close now. I have no obligation to help him. Besides, I feel perfectly fine sitting in the back. I won't move back." Back in the classroom, Kalin was staring intently at the door. When I walked in, a glimmer of expectation lit his eyes. This, I realized, was what he and the teacher had likely planned. A forced reconciliation. He expected me to capitulate, to come back to him. I walked past his desk without a flicker of recognition and took my seat at the back, pulling out my workbook. The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a storm of confusion and hurt. He couldn't understand. He had waited for me to break, to apologize, to come crawling back. He had skipped school, flunked his exam, all to get a rise out of me, to force me to care. But the engine of my life no longer ran on the fuel of his attention. I had found a new power source, and it was cold, clean, and independent. His grand dramatic performance had been for an audience that had already left the theater. The unraveling of Kalin Thorne had begun. And he had no one to blame for it but himself. The Cold War solidified into a permanent state. The initial shockwaves of my defiance subsided, replaced by a new, uneasy normal. Kalin's attempts to provoke me grew more futile and eventually ceased altogether. He seemed lost, adrift in a sea of his own making without me there to be his compass or his anchor. He'd watch me sometimes, a confused frown on his face, as if I were a complex equation he could no longer solve. Sarah, on the other hand, grew bolder in her victory. She'd fully ensconced herself in my old seat in my old life. She played the role of the gracious winner with sickening sweetness, always offering me a sympathetic smile or a quiet word of pity that was meant to sting. They no longer bothered me. I was too busy building my own future to care about the shoddy reconstruction of my past they were playing house in. This period of distant, peaceful focus was what made Sarah's next move so calculated. She couldn't stand being ignored. A predator thrives on the fear of its prey, and my utter indifference was a denial of her power. It happened during a quiet lunch break. Most students were in the cafeteria or library. I was in a small break room, filling my thermos with hot water for tea, valuing the few minutes of solitude. "Elara, we need to talk." I didn't need to turn around to know it was Sarah. Her voice had a particular cloying sweetness that set my teeth on edge. I continued my task, treating her like air. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was meant to be heard. "You really surprised me this time. So, you've learned the art of playing hard to get. I admit you won this round because you could hold back. You turned the tables." I screwed the lid onto my thermos, the finality of the gesture echoing my desire to leave. Seeing I was about to walk away, she swiftly moved to block the doorway. "Don't go." A nasty smile played on her lips. "Don't you want to know why that incident happened that night?" That gave me pause. I finally looked at her, my expression guarded. Her face was a mask of venomous triumph. "I never expected you to be so lucky. I thought you were surely dead." She leaned in, her voice a hushed, gleeful whisper. "That man was arranged by me and my mom. Originally meant to send you to hell. Who knew you'd be so lucky to escape?" The air left my lungs. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I had replayed that night 1,000 times, always concluding it was a random, horrific act of violence. The thought that it had been deliberate, orchestrated, it was a level of evil I had never truly comprehended. She wasn't done. "Oh, and your phone." I secretly threw it under the seat in the car. "Kalin had no idea you didn't have it. He thought you were just being stubborn." The pieces snapped into place with brutal, horrifying clarity. Her isolation tactic, her poverty act. It was all a long game to win Kalin's sympathy, to drive a wedge between us. And when that wasn't enough, she and her mother had resorted to attempted murder. A sinister smile spread across her face. "Did you think rejecting us would make you the winner? Dream on, Lara." Your mother lost to mine and you'll never beat me either. I will take everything that belongs to you, leaving you with nothing. Just like your mother reduced to a handful of ashes. Something in me snapped. The carefully constructed wall of my composure crumbled. Before I could even process the movement, my hand flew out and connected with her cheek. The slap echoed in the small room. She didn't dodge. Instead, she let out a sharp cry, and in a move so swift it was clearly rehearsed, she snatched the thermos from my hand. Before I could react, she twisted the lid off and poured the steaming hot water over her own forearm. A dramatic, piercing scream tore from her lips. It hurts. It burns. She dropped the thermos, clutching her reddening arm, her face a masterpiece of agony and betrayal. Alaire, why? I just wanted to talk. Why would you do this? The door burst open. Students and a teacher, drawn by the scream, flooded into the small room. They found me standing frozen, my hand still stinging from the slap, and Sarah on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, cradling a scalded arm. And leading the charge, his face a thundercloud of rage, was Kalin. He didn't even look at me. He rushed to Sarah, gathering her in his arms. Sarah. My God, what happened? It's nothing, she whimpered, burying her face in his chest. I just made her angry. I shouldn't have bothered her. It's my fault. His gaze finally found me, and it was filled with a pure, unadulterated contempt. You vicious witch, he snarled. In his fury, he shoved me backward. I lost my balance, falling hard against a table before crumpling to the floor, my hips screaming in pain. The incident blew up instantly. Someone had recorded the aftermath. Sarah's tears, my stunned silence, Kalin's protective rage. It was all anyone could talk about. My past bullying of Sarah was dug up and used as proof of my character. The school was forced to act. I was called into the principal's office. Then the police were involved to investigate the assault. Rumors swirled that I would be expelled, that I'd been arrested. The online witch hunt was vicious. For a few days, it seemed my future was truly in jeopardy. Everyone believed it was over for me. Through it all, I remained silent. I answered the police's questions truthfully. I had slapped her, but I did not pour the water. They took my statement with skeptical faces. And then, just as quickly as it had exploded, the situation deflated. The attack videos and comments targeting me vanished from the internet overnight. The police closed their investigation with no charges filed. The school administration stopped calling me in. The next day I walked into school as if nothing had happened. The gossips whispered that my family's money and connections had paid off the right people, that I'd gotten away with it. I let them think it. They didn't need to know the truth. They didn't need to know that a habit born of paranoia had saved me. After the first time Sarah framed me, I had started carrying a small voice-activated recorder in my pocket whenever I was at school. It was a pathetic, desperate measure, but I was determined to never be her victim again without a fight. That day in the break room it had been running. The recording, delivered anonymously to the school administration and the investigating officers, was crystal clear. It captured every vile word Sarah had whispered. Her confession to orchestrating the attack on me, her admission about hiding my phone, her gloating about her mother's victory over mine. It captured the sound of my slap, the clatter of the thermos, and her calculated, dramatic scream before anyone else entered the room. It was not me who was protected by money and connections. It was Sarah who was spared public ruin because the authorities, upon hearing the recording, realized the case was far more twisted than they imagined and involved a previous, much more serious crime. Their sudden silence was to avoid a scandal and to allow a deeper, quieter investigation into Sarah and her mother to begin. Kalin, of course, knew none of this. He skipped school for a week, reportedly accompanying Sarah to the best burn specialists, spending a fortune on her treatment. He was playing the devoted protector, completely unaware that the damsel he was protecting was a viper. Chloe, who had stuck by me through the worst of the gossip, was livid on my behalf. She framed you, didn't she? She seethed in a hushed whisper between classes. She keeps saying you did it because you're jealous of her and Kalin. But others might not know. I see it clearly. You never even look at him anymore. I just smiled, a cold, thin smile. Neither confirming nor denying. I saw them once when they returned to school to pick up our exam admission tickets. Kalin was carefully tending to Sarah's bandaged hand, his touch gentle, his face a mask of concern. They looked like a tragic couple from a Shakespearean play. I packed my things and left without a backward glance. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard Sarah's faint exclamation behind me, no doubt meant to draw my attention. I didn't look back. I didn't pause. I just kept walking, the memory of her confession a fire in my mind, fueling my resolve. The college entrance exams were in 2 weeks. And after that I would be free of them all. The college entrance exams descended upon the school with the weight of a final judgment. For most, it was the culmination of 12 years of relentless work. For me it was the exit door. I arrived at the exam hall early each day, a ghost in the bustling corridors, and left the moment the final bell rang, melting into the crowd before Kalin or Sarah could even pack their bags. I was a student, a test taker, a number on a sheet. Nothing more. The 3 days passed in a focused blur. When it was over, a collective sigh of relief seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The air was suddenly light with the promise of freedom. Kalin, it seemed, celebrated his freedom by immediately proving my point. As if to spite me, to show me what I was missing, he bought 2 plane tickets to Japan. The news spread through our social circles like wildfire. Chloe was my furious, albeit unwelcome, news feed. Can you believe it? Her message buzzed on my phone, a string of angry emojis following. He's taking her to Japan. Because she always wanted to go but never had the money. He's such a cliché. A walking, talking monument to idiocy. I deleted the message without responding. Their trip was a relief. It meant silence. It meant 2 weeks where I wouldn't have to accidentally see them, a buffer between the life I was leaving and the one I was about to start. My phone, however, became a battleground. Kalin's friends, a loyal brigade of well-meaning enablers, took it upon themselves to mediate. Liam, Myra, you have to come to the class party tonight. Kale booked the whole club. It's a big deal. Liam, this is your last chance. Just apologize and you guys can start over. He even brought you a gift from Japan. Liam, Myra? Seriously, don't be stupid. He's not going to wait forever. I stopped reading after the first one. Their messages were echoes from a world whose rules I no longer recognized. They spoke of apologies and chances as if they were commodities I should be desperate to trade for. They didn't understand that the account had been closed, the ledger settled with a price paid in fear and pain on a rainy night. I had more important things to do than attend a party for a future I wanted no part of. That evening, as Kalin's friends were likely preening for their big night, I was standing in the elegant, familiar living room of the Thorne house. The bracelet, the beautiful cold heirloom that had symbolized a promise between 2 mothers, felt heavy in my hand. Eleanor and Robert Thorne looked at me, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning concern. Elara, sweetheart, this is no joking matter, Eleanor said, her voice gentle but strained. You can't make such a decision out of momentary anger. Uncle, Auntie, I'm not angry, I said, my voice calm and clear, devoid of the tremor I felt inside. This is a decision I've made after careful consideration. I placed the velvet box containing the bracelet on their coffee table. The click of the lid closing seemed to echo in the silent room. If it's because of that girl, Sarah, don't worry, Robert Thorne began, his tone firm. We would never allow. I cut him off gently but firmly. It has nothing to do with Sarah. I just don't like Kalin anymore. That's all. The finality in my voice stunned them into silence. I saw the understanding dawn in Eleanor's eyes, the understanding that this wasn't a tantrum. This was a verdict. I retrieved my mother's jade pendant from where it had been displayed on their mantelpiece, a silent exchange now nullified. Without another word, I turned and walked out of their house, out of the life that had been planned for me since birth. The night air felt different, lighter. I was untethered. As I drove away, my phone lit up with a video from Chloe. It was shaky, shot from a distance, but the message was clear. The night sky over the private club was ablaze with brilliant, expensive fireworks. The very fireworks Kalin and I had once dreamily sketched out for our official beginning. He was setting them off for her. For Sarah. I stared at the screen, not with heartbreak but with a profound sense of detachment. It was like watching a play about characters I barely knew. Then an unknown number flashed on my screen. I answered, and a male voice, crisp and official, spoke only a few words before the line went dead. Come to the police station immediately if you're free. I didn't need to ask why. I knew. The recording had done its work. The trap I had let Sarah spring on herself had finally closed. Her mother and my father were already in custody for fraud and the attempted attack on me. Now it was Sarah's turn. Meanwhile, at the club, the celebration was in full swing, but the guest of honor was miserable. Kalin sat on a plush sofa, a drink in his hand that he wasn't drinking, his eyes constantly darting toward the entrance. The music was deafening, his friends were rowdy, but he was utterly alone in the crowd. 2 hours. She was 2 hours late. His disappointment curdled into a bitter, furious anger. He had done everything. He'd booked the entire club, arranged the fireworks, even bought that stupid souvenir in Japan despite his better judgment. He'd given her every opportunity to end this stupid, prideful game. And she couldn't even be bothered to show up? What was she trying to prove? This gathering had been her idea once upon a time. She was the one who'd wanted to announce their happiness to the world. Now she was leaving him hanging like a fool in front of everyone. The fireworks display he'd prepared would be a monument to his own humiliation. His patience, always thin where I was concerned, evaporated. If she wouldn't come, then she shouldn't blame him. It was Alara who had broken their agreement. He stood up abruptly, drawing the attention of the crowd. I prepared fireworks for Sarah's recovery, he announced, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. Let's all go watch. The brilliant, colorful explosions lit up the night sky, drawing oohs and ahs from the crowd. Sarah, standing beside him, looked up with tears of gratitude in her eyes, utterly moved by the grand gesture she believed was for her. Kalin watched the fleeting, expensive sparks die in the air, the words, "I love you," written in fire for everyone but the person they were meant for. The emptiness in his chest yawned wide open. He turned and stalked back into the noisy club, leaving Sarah to bask in the afterglow of a lie. He drank then. Heavily. Drink after drink, trying to drown the nagging voice that told him he had lost something irreplaceable, that his grand stand had been for nothing. The party degenerated into a blur of shouting and spilled drinks. Soon, everyone was sprawled in various states of stupor. Sarah, ever the efficient hostess, directed waiters to arrange rides for her intoxicated classmates. Finally, only she and the unconscious Kalin remained in the private room. The sweet, concerned mask dropped from her face. A cold, calculating sneer twisted her features. She pulled a small bottle from her bag, the same kind of aphrodisiac she'd likely used to manipulate situations before. She sprayed it liberally around Kalin's face. It took effect quickly. Kalin, in his drugged deep sleep, began to twist uneasily. A low groan escaped his lips. Sarah leaned over him, her voice a soft, purring whisper. Kalin, wake up." His eyes fluttered open. They were glazed, unnaturally bloodshot. He looked at her, but he didn't see her. The drug and his own deep-seated longing conjured the ghost he wanted to see. "Alara," he murmured, his voice slurred with desire and intoxication. "Alara, you're here." A flash of pure hatred crossed Sarah's face at the name, but it was quickly replaced by predatory satisfaction. "It's me," she whispered, leaning closer. "It's me. I missed you so much," he mumbled, pulling her into a clumsy, desperate embrace. "I missed you to death." Sarah kissed him and he responded with a fervor meant for someone else. Just as their clothes began to come off, just as Sarah's plan was about to reach its vile climax, the door to the private room was kicked open with a force that shattered the lurid scene. Standing in the doorway, her face a thundercloud of apocalyptic fury, was Eleanor Thorne. The infatuated Kalin, lost in his drugged fantasy, noticed nothing. But Sarah froze, her eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated terror. Eleanor Thorne took in the scene, her son out of his mind and the naked girl on top of him. Her voice when she spoke was colder than I had ever heard it. For asking for death. He spat the words out like poison. "Take the young master to the hospital. Now." 2 bodyguards I hadn't even noticed surged forward. They hauled the incoherent Kalin off the sofa and swiftly dragged him out of the room. Sarah scrambled to cover herself to find her clothes, but another bodyguard snatched them away. She was left exposed and trembling under Eleanor's glacial gaze. "You dare to scheme against my son?" Eleanor's smile was a terrifying thing. "Just you wait." She nodded to the bodyguard holding Sarah's bag. He rummaged through it and pulled out the same small bottle. He stepped toward the terrified girl. "No. Please no." Sarah begged, trying to curl into a ball. The bodyguard ignored her. He forced her head back and sprayed the entire contents of the bottle directly into her face. Then they left. They simply walked out, leaving Sarah alone, naked and beginning to sweat as the powerful chemicals entered her system. Panicked, disoriented, she stumbled out of the club, the drug hijacking her senses. The world became a blur of heat and need. She fumbled with her clothes, eventually finding something to put on, but it didn't matter. The compulsion was too strong. Stumbling out onto the main road, she began to tear at her clothes. Soon she was completely naked again, her actions becoming increasingly erratic and desperate. She lunged at a passing man, begging for intimacy. The shocked man shoved her away in alarm. Finally, her crazed, drug-addled eyes landed on an old homeless man huddled in a doorway. She clung to him, begging, her movements crude and horrifying. Passers-by stopped in shock. Phones were pulled out. Some started live-streaming the surreal, tragic spectacle. Others called the police. When the authorities finally arrived, Sarah was still desperately clinging to the confused old man, refusing to let go. Her incident, broadcast live to the world, was already beginning to ripple across the internet, a digital wildfire of shame. At that exact moment, I was high above the clouds, my face turned toward the window, watching the lights of the city I was leaving behind grow smaller and smaller until they vanished entirely. I was bound for Tibet, for mountains so vast they could hold all my silence, for a sky so wide it could contain my new beginning. The game was over. And I had left the board far behind. The plane touched down in Lhasa with a gentle bump, pulling me from a light, uneasy sleep. The first breath of Tibetan air was thin and cold, scented with dust and distant incense. It was a clean smell, utterly foreign, and it felt like washing away the grime of the life I'd left behind. I found my hotel, a modest place away from the tourist centers, and collapsed into a bed that felt a million miles from Kalin's world of private clubs and fireworks. When I woke hours later, the high-altitude sun was streaming through the window. I felt disoriented, the silence of physical presence in the room. For a moment it was peaceful. Then I remembered my phone. I switched it on. It buzzed and chimed incessantly, a delayed explosion of notifications. Dozens of messages from Chloe. The first few were frantic. Chloe, onde Lara? Where are you? Chloe, you are not going to believe what happened. Chloe, it's Sarah. Something's happened. Something bad. Then the messages shifted, becoming a stream of horrified, almost gleeful disbelief. Links to news articles, screenshots of blurred but unmistakable videos, fragments of gossip. Chloe, she was at the club. After you left, something went wrong. Chloe, they're saying she had some kind of drug on her? An aphrodisiac? Maybe she drank too much and mistook it for something else? Chloe, there's video, Lara. It's on the street. In front of everyone. She was with some homeless guy. It was live-streamed. My God, this is just unbelievable. I scrolled through the images, my stomach tightening. The photos were grainy, the videos shaky, but the horror was clear. Sarah, naked, desperate, clawing at a disheveled man in a doorway. The comments were a torrent of mockery, shock, and vile speculation. Chloe, by the way, did you know her parents haven't shown up at all? Even after this, radio silence. Weird, right? I stared at the screen, my fingers cold. It wasn't weird. I knew exactly why her parents were silent. Lyra Zhang's mother and my own heartless father were currently in no position to spare any attention for their daughter. They had been invited by the police for a much more serious chat. My dad was being questioned for fraud and tax evasion. As for Daphne Moss, her tea date was about a malicious plot to harm me. I had to thank Sarah for her final, desperate confession in the break room. If she hadn't been so eager to gloat, to shatter me with the truth of that night, I would never have had the evidence. The recording I'd made was crystal clear. Her voice, smug and vicious, admitting to the orchestrated attack, was all the police needed to reopen the case, to find the man who'd assaulted me, and to draw a direct line to her mother. Sarah had always thought I was a defeated opponent who wouldn't fight back. She never knew I had learned to armor myself in silence and to weaponize her own words. The police had acted swiftly. While Kalin was buying her souvenirs in Japan, and while she was planning her final, pathetic scheme with that bottle, the net was already closing around her family. Her very public meltdown wasn't just a tragic accident. It was the direct result of her mother's methods being turned back on her by a righteously furious Eleanor Thorne. Sarah had been hoisted by her own petard, her downfall as sordid and dramatic as her entire life had been. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a hollow, weary sadness. She was a monster of her mother's making and her end was fittingly grotesque. I typed a brief reply to Chloe. Me, I'm safe. Taking a break. Don't worry about me. I then blocked everyone else from my old life. Their drama was no longer my concern. Meanwhile, in a sterile hospital room, Kalin Thorne was waking up to a different kind of nightmare. His head pounded, a dull, throbbing ache that made it hard to think. The last thing he remembered clearly was the taste of cheap whiskey and the bitter disappointment of an empty doorway. The rest was a fog of heat, confused sensations, and the haunting, desperate feeling that Alara had been there, that she had finally come back to him. He blinked open his eyes, squinting against the harsh fluorescent lights. His parents were there, their faces etched with a mixture of concern and something else. Something that looked like grim anger. Mom? Dad? He croaked, his throat raw. Why are you here? What happened? Eleanor Thorne's face, usually so warm when she looked at him, was like stone. You still have the nerve to ask? If it weren't for Alara's reminder, you would have fallen for that shameless woman's trap. Kalin pushed himself up on his elbows, confusion cutting through the headache. What do you mean? What trap? That thing, his father Robert said, the word dripping with disdain. Sarah. He drugged you, Kalin. We found you at the club with her. He had a bottle of some aphrodisiac. She was trying to entrap you. Fragments of memory assaulted him, Sarah's face close to his, but his mind whispering Alara, Alara. The heat, the shame, the wrongness of it all. He felt a wave of nausea. How is that possible? He's just a friend. More like a sister to me. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped Eleanor. You actually believe what a mistress's pet says? She was deceiving you, you foolish boy. Deliberately making you let your guard down. The foundations of Kalin's reality were cracking. Everything he thought he knew, every noble reason he'd constructed for defending Sarah, began to crumble into dust. In the wreckage, one thought emerged, clear and desperate. Does Alara know? He asked, his voice small. Why hasn't she come to see me? His parents exchanged a heavy, loaded glance. You and Alara have no relationship whatsoever, Eleanor said, her voice cold and final. Why should she care about you? Why would she come to see you? The words hit him like a physical blow. Wasn't she my, he couldn't even finish. The word, betrothed, sounded like a pathetic joke from a childish fairy tale. So, you still remember your relationship with Alara? Robert's voice was sharp. I thought you'd forgotten everything after being enchanted by that woman. I'm not infatuated with Sarah. Kalin protested, the headache flaring with his desperation. I just wanted to teach Alara a lesson. She's too stubborn and that's not good for her. She'll suffer for it. The room went utterly silent. Eleanor Thorne stared at her son, and for the first time he saw not anger, but a profound, devastating disappointment. You're utterly incorrigible, she whispered. Then her hand snapped out, connecting with his cheek in a stinging slap. Is this how you teach someone a lesson? Do you have any idea what Alara has been through? Do you know what that vicious mistress and her daughter did to her? You bastard. Kalin recoiled, holding his face, more shocked by her words than the slap. What are you talking about? The night you left her on the road, Eleanor said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. The man who attacked her. It wasn't random. Sarah and her mother hired him. They tried to have her raped, Kalin. Raped. The air left Kalin's lungs. The world tilted, the hospital room swimming around him. The rain, the darkness, Alara's terrified face at the car window. It all rushed back, now viewed through a new horrifying lens. He had left her there. He had left her for her would-be attackers to find. When did this happen? He stammered, his blood running cold. Why didn't I know? It's all in the past. What can you do now that you know? Eleanor's voice was flat, exhausted. You've already hurt her and she won't look back. Alara already gave up on you the moment you abandoned her for that girl and nearly got her killed. The truth was a sledgehammer. It shattered the last of his defenses, his excuses, his arrogant belief that he was teaching her some kind of lesson. He hadn't been her disciplinarian. He had been her Judas. He didn't know how he got out of the hospital. Numb, operating on a blind, animal instinct, he found himself in his car, driving on autopilot. He slapped himself across the face once, twice, the pain a feeble punishment for the enormity of his failure. He was desperate to find Alara, to apologize, to grovel, to somehow undo the unforgivable. He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling. He typed out a message to her, a long, rambling plea for forgiveness. A red exclamation mark appeared immediately next to the text. Message failed. You are not a friend of this user. He was blocked. A panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He threw the phone aside and slammed his foot on the accelerator, racing desperately toward her house, toward the home that had always been his second home. He skidded to a stop outside. The windows were dark. He pounded on the door, calling her name, his voice cracking with desperation. There was no answer. The housekeeper, an elderly woman who had known us both since we were children, came around the side from the grocery shopping, her expression wary. "Young Master Thorne," she said, her tone cool. "She's not here." "Where is she? When will she be back?" he demanded, his voice ragged. The woman shook her head. "Miss Alara has gone on a trip. The return date is uncertain." She turned and walked away, leaving Kalin alone on the doorstep, the truth finally, fully dawning on him. She was gone. She had sold the house, changed her number and vanished. She had erased him from her life as completely as if he had never existed. The Emperor's wait was over. He was alone in his empty empire, and his queen had long since fled the kingdom. 3 months. That's how long it took for the dust to settle in my old life and for me to find my footing in my new one. 3 months of the thin, clean air of Lesson, of anonymous walks through bustling markets where no one knew my name or my story. I'd changed my number, only giving it to Chloe, who had become my tenuous, gossiping link to a world I was happy to have escaped. My new university was everything I needed it to be: large, impersonal and brilliant. It was on the other side of the country, a deliberate choice. Here I was just Alara Vance, a student with good grades and a quiet demeanor. There were no whispers, no pitying glances, no history. I buried myself in my studies, the familiar act of learning a soothing balm. I was building a life, piece by careful piece, and it was mine alone. Chloe, ever my loyal informant, kept me updated, though I'd long stopped asking. Her messages were a morbid curiosity, a window into a burning building I'd safely escaped. "Chloe, he's looking for you. Like everywhere. Chloe, he showed up at our uni gates today. Stood there all day with a massive bouquet of roses. Looked like a lost puppy. Pathetic. Chloe, his driver finally came and picked him up. Serves him right for being such a monumental idiot over Sarah." I deleted the messages. He wasn't my concern. The image of him standing there playing the repentant lover felt like a scene from a bad movie. It was too little years too late. The damage was calcified, a permanent scar. I'd sold the house, my mother's house. It had been harder than I'd expected, walking through those empty rooms for the last time, each one echoing with memories of a happier past. But it was necessary. It was the final severance. The money was safely invested, a foundation for the future my mother would have wanted for me. A future free of thorns and mosses. I thought I'd been thorough. I thought I'd covered my tracks. But Kalin, fueled by a desperate guilt I could only imagine, was persistent. He found me on a crisp autumn afternoon. I was walking back from the library, a stack of books in my arms, my head down as I mentally outlined an essay. The campus was beautiful, all turning leaves and golden light, and for a moment, I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost alien. Alara. The voice was familiar but worn thin like fabric rubbed raw. I stopped walking. I didn't have to look up. I knew. I slowly raised my head. Kalin Thorne stood a few feet away, leaning against an ancient oak tree as if he needed its support. He looked diminished. The arrogant set of his shoulders was gone. His clothes were rumpled, his hair was a mess, and there were dark shadows under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. In his hand he clutched a single, sorry-looking rose, its petals beginning to brown at the edges. He took a hesitant step forward. I've been looking for you." I said nothing. I just looked at him, my expression as neutral as I could make it. The silence stretched, becoming a chasm between us. He flinched under my gaze, his eyes dropping to the ground before forcing themselves back up to meet mine. They were filled with a raw, aching misery I had never seen in him before. I'm so sorry." The words tumbled out, choked and desperate. "I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know what they did to you. What I did to you. Leaving you there. It was the biggest mistake of my life." I'll never forgive myself. Please, please just let me explain. Let me make it right. He took another step, his hand outstretched, the rose offered like a peace treaty for a war he'd already lost. I didn't move. I didn't take the rose. I let the silence hang in the air between us, heavy and absolute. I watched him, this boy I had loved for most of my life, and felt nothing but a distant, cold emptiness. Finally I spoke. My voice was calm, flat, devoid of the anger or hurt he probably expected. It was the voice of a stranger stating a simple, irrefutable fact. If apologies were enough, I said, curling one corner of my lips in a smile that held no warmth, what would we need the police for? The words landed like a physical blow. He recoiled, his face paling. The rose trembled in his hand. The harm you caused me is already done, Kalin. I continued, my tone conversational as if discussing the weather. If not for a stroke of sheer luck, if not for that neighborhood watch, what do you think would have become of me? A young girl violated on the side of the road because you were throwing a tantrum? Do you think I would be here? Do you think I would be able to sit in a classroom? To have a future? I took a small step forward, not to close the distance but to emphasize my words. Becoming mentally ill would have been the best-case scenario. And you? I let my gaze sweep over him, from his disheveled hair to the pathetic flower in his hand. You were one of the accomplices. You delivered me to them. His breath hitched. Elara, I didn't know. That's the point. The first flicker of emotion entered my voice, not anger but a sharp, icy impatience. You didn't want to know. You chose to believe the easiest, most flattering story. The one where you were the noble hero protecting a fragile girl from the vicious bully. It was simpler than questioning, than doubting, than actually seeing me. You were so convinced of my devotion that you thought you could treat me like garbage and I'd always come crawling back. Well, I didn't. I won't. I adjusted the stack of books in my arms, a deliberate, mundane action that screamed how insignificant this confrontation was to me. You demand my forgiveness? You who was the catalyst for the worst night of my life. You don't get to demand anything from me. Not ever again. I saw the hope in his eyes finally, truly die. It was extinguished, replaced by a desolate understanding of the permanence of his loss. I will never forgive you for what you did, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, but every syllable sharp and clear. Not in this lifetime. I paused, letting the finality of it sink in. And not even in death will I forgive you. I turned then. I didn't look back. I walked away from him, under the golden autumn leaves, toward my dorm, toward my classes, toward my future. I heard a sound behind me, a ragged, broken sob quickly stifled. I didn't pause. I didn't falter. He was a ghost from a past life and I had long since stopped believing in ghosts. The weight of the books in my arms was real. The path ahead of me was real. He was just a shadow and I was walking into the sun. I didn't look back. The sound of his shattered composure, that single choked sob, was the closing note of a song I'd stopped listening to long ago. It faded behind me, swallowed by the rustle of leaves and the distant chatter of students on the path ahead. The weight of my books was an anchor, tethering me to the present, to this new, solid reality I was building for myself. My life at university was a world away from the gilded cage of my past. I shared a dorm with a girl from a coastal town who talked endlessly about marine biology and had never heard of the thorns or the scandal that had briefly rocked our old social circle. We ate cheap noodles at 2 a.m. while cramming for exams, and the biggest drama in our lives was a malfunctioning laundry machine. It was mundane. It was perfect. I threw myself into my studies not as an escape but as a purpose. The clarity of mathematics, the logic of code, the structure of scientific principles. These were things that couldn't be manipulated by a pretty cry or a well-told lie. They were honest. My professors began to know my name for the right reasons. For my insights in class, for the precision of my work. Chloe's messages became less frequent, the updates from my old life feeling more and more like dispatches from a foreign country. The last major news she'd sent was about Sarah. After her very public breakdown, she'd been quietly admitted to a private psychiatric facility. Her mother, Daphne, was facing a long list of charges, including conspiracy to commit assault. My father, in a desperate attempt to save himself, had thrown Daphne under the bus, revealing their financial schemes and her role in the attack on me. Their twisted alliance had imploded in a spectacularly ugly way. He got a reduced sentence for cooperation. She faced the full force of the law. There was a certain poetic justice in it. I never asked about Kalin. Chloe, sensing the finality of my silence on the matter, stopped offering. A year bled into two. I spent my summers interning at tech firms, my name earning its own weight on a resume. I learned to code, to build, to create. I made friends who liked me for my dry sense of humor and my ability to explain complex problems, not for my family's name or my connection to Kalin Thorne. One weekend during my final year, I was visiting Chloe in our hometown. She'd chosen a university closer to home. We were browsing in a bookstore and I felt that familiar, uneasy prickle on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. I looked up and across the aisle I saw him. Kalin. He was thinner, his face sharper, the boyish charm sanded away into something quieter, more austere. He was holding a book on architectural design. He looked ordinary. Just another student. Our eyes met. There was no dramatic rush of emotion, no plea in his gaze. Just a deep, weary sadness and a flicker of acknowledgement. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't an invitation. It was a surrender. I nodded back once, a gesture of cold, distant closure. Then I turned to Chloe, pointed to a novel on the shelf and made a comment about the author. The moment passed. He was a chapter I'd already finished reading. At my graduation I stood in my cap and gown, my name called out to a crowd of cheering strangers and one beaming Chloe. As I walked across the stage, diploma in hand, I scanned the audience out of habit, a ghost of an old instinct. And then I remembered. No one from my past life was there. My father was still navigating the legal and social consequences of his actions. The Thorns had not been invited. The realization was a liberation. My achievements were entirely my own. My future was unwritten and I held the pen. I took a job across the country in a city known for its innovation and its distance from everything I'd known. I built a life there. A small apartment with a view of a different skyline. Colleagues who became friends. The quiet satisfaction of a problem solved, a project completed. Years later, a faded wedding invitation arrived in the mail. It was from Chloe. He was getting married. I RSVP'd yes, of course. The wedding was a small, sunny affair in a garden. I wore a simple blue dress and felt comfortable in my skin in a way I never had as a teenager. I saw many old classmates. They had all moved on, their lives filled with new loves, new careers, new worries. I was just a Lara to them now, a vaguely remembered figure from high school. During the reception, as the music swelled and couples moved to the dance floor, I found myself standing at the periphery, sipping a glass of champagne. I felt a presence beside me. I didn't need to turn. I knew. He stood there watching the dancers, a glass in his own hand. He was older, the lines on his face etched by time and I suspected regret. He was handsome still, but the arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet solemnity. We stood in silence for a long moment, the happy music a stark contrast to the void between us. She seems happy, he said finally, his voice low, referring to Chloe. She is, I replied, my tone neutral. Another stretch of silence. He took a slow breath. I heard you're a lead developer now. At Sterling Tech. That's impressive. Thank you, I said. It was. I'd earned it. He turned to look at me, then really look at me for the first time that day. His eyes searched my face, not for the girl I was, but for the woman I had become. Alara, he stopped, swallowing hard. The words, the apology he'd doubtless rehearsed for a decade, seemed to stick in his throat. They were too small, too insignificant for the canyon of history that separated us. I saved him the trouble. I met his gaze, my own clear and steady. There was no anger there anymore. No hurt. Just a vast, unbridgeable distance. It was a long time ago, Kalin, I said softly. The words weren't forgiveness. They were something else entirely. They were an obituary. They were the final, quiet acknowledgement that the past was a foreign country, and we were no longer its citizens. He understood. The hope that had flickered in his eyes for a second, the desperate, foolish hope that time had eroded my resolve, died completely. He nodded, a slow, painful dip of his head. Yes, he whispered. It was. He turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd of wedding guests. I watched him go, not with triumph but with a profound sense of peace. I had not forgiven him. I had not forgotten. But I had finally been freed. The weight of him, of Sarah, of that rainy night had been lifted. I had not chosen to forgive. I had simply outgrown the need to. I turned back to watch the dancers, to my friend glowing with happiness under the strings of lights. I took a sip of my champagne. It tasted sweet. The future stretched out before me, bright and unburdened. I was Alara Vance. And my story was my own. The end.